So it looks like there may be a potential win for the energy sector of Canada when it comes to pipelines, folks. This is something that's been a long-standing battle through all the years of Justin Trudeau into Mark Carney. This is something that, has obviously put the Alberta economy, the Canadian economy, Ottawa and Alberta at a stalemate for such a long time. And I have, once on record to say that, understandably, I understand why people are against pipelines. I was one of those people at the start because I saw, what happened with oil spills. I know what happens, the dangers of, transporting the energy between places. I understand that. And over time, I have grown or kind of moved because understandably, this idea that we are just going to not use fossil fuels and not have, Alberta as an energy resource was feasibly impossible. It was literally impossible to not be using fossil fuels, that the energy sector that is very, very crucial to the country's GDP, that's very crucial to the province, very crucial to, the formation of Canada and the revenue, and the resources that it accumulates is so dire. So my position went from, okay, no pipelines to, well, let's actually have a reasonable discussion about it. And it's kind of morphed to understand that, pipelines are kind of essential, given the fact that, you want to talk about the environmental factors of it. I weighed out the pros and cons, but I also weighed out the pros and cons of what we're doing right now because we're still using fossil fuels, ladies and gentlemen. We're just transporting them from foreign nations. And which one has more environmental impact on it? Having a pipeline go from one province to another, or transporting a bunch of crude oil from foreign countries that have to arrive on tanker ships and then have to go into tanker trucks, then have to be transported to all the remaining areas across Canada. Which one has more emissions and environmental damages? I would say what we're doing right now. So that's what kind of transformed me to say that, yes, I understand pipelines are not great, that, they need to be monitored, that obviously oil spills are a predominant issue with that, but it's better than what we're doing right now. And it seems to be leading in that direction, at least for the most part. We don't know exactly for sure if this is going to be solid or not, but here's Mario Zelia saying, breaking, a huge victory for Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. No more emissions cap. We got more pipelines. BC Eby, so that's David Eby, the BC Premier, gets zero veto power. Tankers on the BC coast are no longer forbidden. A monster new pipeline is coming, 1 million barrels a day. TMX is going to be allowed to pump out another 400,000 barrels daily. And I know that, again, I understand that people have concerns about this, but we've been trying to, get out of fossil fuels, do this net zero catastrophe for over a decade now. And this idea that we're just going to transform everything to a net zero, we're going to have, solar and wind farms, is not feasible. It's not feasible. We've been over a decade now of this, radical idea that has not worked. And we wasted money. We're killing off our economy and hollowing out one of our precious resources that could allow for a steady revenue to generate into this country. So this is why I'm kind of on the side of Alberta. Why I'm kind of on the side of, saying that this is a prosperous idea, that, we should be looking for efficient ways to transport this oil. And we have technologies, we have the resources to make sure the pipelines are secure, to make sure that, it doesn't go through Indigenous lands. But this is part of the WEF's net zero catastrophe agenda to kill off Canada. to kill off the economy, to kill off our resources, so they can hollow this out, and Canada can no longer self-sustain itself. That it'll have to go through the IMF, the World Funds. So listen what Mario Zelia has to say about it.
This is massive and breaking news, and I honestly think Danielle Smith just scored the biggest victory in Alberta's history. Watch this. She just got the pipeline dream which Canada has been waiting for. No production caps on Alberta energy, no net zero regulations, no BC veto. There's going to be a massive 1 million barrel per day pipeline. They're going to be expanding the TMX by 400,000 barrels a day. Oil tankers are going to be allowed on the BC coast. While there's all this misinformation that was being spread, Eby could veto any of this. The laws actually don't allow for him to do that. I will tell you this, I've heard it from very reliable sources that the Liberal Party is pissed. They're really pissed at Mark Carney. Here's the reality of what Mark Carney's facing. He knows our auto industry is destroyed. He knows that he's not going to be negotiating any sort of good deal with Donald Trump. He knows that our way out of this looming recession that we're...
But who cares, right? That's what Carney said to a press conference. Who cares? Aren't you going to negotiate with Donald Trump and sort this trade deal so we can actually get manufacturing back to... Oh, who cares? That's Carney. That's Carney saying that. That's the prime minister of this country, ladies and gentlemen. And that shot himself in the foot numerous times. Because as he's stating there, the auto sector is collapsing. The trade negotiations have fallen short. The economy is beyond below par. And the GDP is collapsing. This country is collapsing. So the resources, meaning the Alberta oil, the reserves coming out of Alberta that can be transported to different provinces, not only would be beneficial to export to places like China that's willing to buy Canadian oil. They've stated it a couple times now that they're willing to reach out to the Canadian energy sector to buy their goods. But also we can transport that oil reserves to other parts of the country and make that resource more beneficial to Canadians, meaning that Canadians can actually buy Canadian goods instead of buying a bunch of oil and fossil fuels from foreign countries that are going to be taxed to no end, that they're going to put the carbon taxes on it, and why gasoline is so expensive. And it seems like a win-win beneficial. But again, I understand people's, worry, and I understand that. But you have to look at the realities. You have to look at the whole perspective of killing off one of the most predominant sectors of this country. Alberta has a huge energy resource, and we need to use our resources and utilize them for the benefit of our country, for the benefit of not only Alberta, but for all people across the land. So that's why this is actually a pretty good win. But we'll see what happens.
We're going to be hit with massive job losses and a decrease in GDP is through oil and energy. That is the antithesis of what everything the Liberals stood for and everything that Canada needs at this moment. It's going to create a lot of division and a lot of chaos in the Liberal Party. Here are the rumors that are floating around of some of the Liberal MPs that are set to leave caucus. And in the background, after this announcement, I can promise you there's going to be a heck of a lot more. Shout out to Danielle Smith. They didn't think she could do it. A master negotiator. Every single person in Alberta and every single Canadian needs to be thanking her. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't be where we are today.
And just to remind people that it was Danielle Smith when the tariffs were being announced by Donald Trump onto Canada. It was her that went down to Mar-a-Lago and negotiated with Trump directly, and Trump allowed for a pause because the tariffs were supposed to be implemented on January 20th, the day he was inaugurated. That was the day that Canada was immediately going to get these tariffs. But Danielle Smith negotiated with Donald Trump to allow an extension until February 1st. And by the time February 1st came around, that's when Justin Trudeau, who was the prime minister at the time, finally spoke out. So Danielle Smith definitely needs some praise. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad to her, but I definitely give some praise. I definitely see her on a higher pedestal than a lot of the other politicians of the country, especially that list of people that are claiming that they want to leave. You know, the Chrystia Freelands, the Stephen Guilbeault, Mark Miller. You know, we need to pour in a bunch of illegal migrants to sustain the economy so that more and more Canadians are displaced from jobs, and then we use the migrants for cheap labor. Because that's how it works. Then no one can afford to live in Canada. That's how the economy works. It's not the fact that corporations are breathing down your neck to profit off of cheap labor. So it seems beneficial. And here, this is from the National Observer, saying BC Premier finally gets federal meeting after pipeline deal is done. So here's David Eby, who's the Premier of British Columbia, chiming into this. Because he's the one that's preventing. He's the one that's crossing the line saying, no, we don't want to extend this pipeline from Alberta to the ship ports in BC so that they can export the resources to places like China that, again, are willing to reach out and purchase Canadian oil. They're willing to do this. They're willing to drop the tariffs on the canola farms, on agriculture. They're willing to negotiate with Canada. Canada's not willing to negotiate with them. That's the turnaround, folks. You think it's the other way around because that's what, you know, the CBC and the press corps is telling you, but it's actually the opposite. China's willing to negotiate with Canada. Canada doesn't want to negotiate with China. Just like Canada doesn't want to negotiate with the United States. And then they tricked you. They manufactured a psyop telling you to, you know, point your elbows up and buy more Canadian as Canadian resources and jobs are being displaced out of the country. As they're bringing in more migrants to go against Canadians. It was all a giant charade. So, this article says, British Columbia Premier David Eby kept his cards close about Friday's meeting with Federal Natural Resource Minister Tim Hodgson a day after Ottawa struck a pipeline deal with Alberta. It's Eby's first federal face-to-face meeting after being shut out of talks between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith around a possible pipeline crossing BC to the north coast, which would also involve carve-outs to the legislated oil tanker ban in provincial waters. Days before the Alberta-Ottawa memorandum of understanding was revealed, Eby told Carney it was unacceptable the deal was brokered without input from BC. Meaning him. Because British Columbia, the people of BC, are kind of on the side of Alberta. They're kind of actually on the side of Alberta because they realize how essential our energy sector is to the formation of the country to keep our economy afloat. But it's David Eby and his donors, his people backing him from the globalist oligarchs that don't want this pipeline because they want to see Canada crushed. Eby evaded questions at a press conference on Friday about any desired outcomes in his meeting with Hodgson, instead reiterating the message he's been consistently delivering before and after the Carney-Smith deal was revealed. Eby described the pipeline deal with no route proponent or financial backer as an energy vampire draining provincial, federal, and coastal First Nations attention, time, and money away from existing projects. These are initiatives awaiting final investment decisions on the North Coast worth nearly $90 billion, including the LNG Canada Phase 2 project sitting on Carney's major projects list. At the moment, the pipeline is solely a communications exercise from the province of Alberta, Eby said. However, ongoing discussion about lifting the oil tanker memorandum on the coast jeopardizes coastal First Nation support needed for BC projects that will create jobs and revenue for all of Canada, he added. I'll be reinforcing that message with Mr. Hodgson, who is well aware of these realities, Eby said. So, the thing I don't understand, because I can recognize, again, I recognize why the First Nations communities are calling this out, because you're building a pipeline directly in their path. I understand that. So instead of just canceling out the entire project, instead of leading out the energy sector dry with this nonsense, with this garbage, why are they not resourcing or using the ability to construct the pipeline around these First Nations reserves, or move them to a different location? Like, I don't understand this. I really don't understand this. I understand that you don't want a pipeline going through if your community, if it might affect your water supply, if it might affect other resources, if there's an oil spill and it devastates the community. I understand those. But why is it the only option? Like, why is it only one or the other? It just seems like a 1 and 0. Either we built the pipeline or we don't build the pipeline. Why is never the option, hey, let's just build around this coastal First Nations community? Why are we not just build a pipeline up towards the territories and across Yukon? Maybe that would be a solution. Like, I just don't understand that. I really don't understand why it seems like this is a yes or no, such a black and white issue, when there's other options and there's other ways to actually do this. And we could have been doing this. We could have been doing this for quite an extensive long time, which is why I'm kind of on board with this. I'm on board with this because we've seen how disastrous this climate change initiatives, all this, net zero catastrophe has done to the country and has done to the job sector and the economy as a whole. And it's not feasible. It's not working. And it's just going to kill more of this country. So the coastal First Nations have said attempts to meet with the government have been stymied before and since the MOU was announced. CFN President and Heiltsuk Chief Marilyn Sleet issued a sharp rebuke to Ottawa and Hodgson personally on Friday. We have a strong track record of working with the federal and BC governments on world-leading initiatives across the Great Bear Rainforest and Sea that are protecting nature, creating permanent jobs, and contributing billions of dollars to Canada's economy, said Sleet in a statement. We can only continue that work if we have productive relationships grounded in respectful dialogue. Coastal First Nations, representing 8 member nations, did not meet on Friday with Hodgson, given the short advance warning that made up different from leadership to attend, a spokesperson with the CFN told Canada's National Observer. In an interview with CBC's David Cochrane on Thursday, the minister was dismissive about those concerns. Hodgson's comments about meeting with the CFN during the interview were deeply disrespectful and show a lack of understanding of our communities, Sleet said. When pressed about not yet meeting with coastal First Nations and Sleet's inability to make the journey to Vancouver, Hodgson responded, "It's called Zoom. It's what we're using," Hodgson replied. "I'm not a coastal First Nations chief," Cochrane said, suggesting leaders might want to meet in person and face to face. If they're going to have a bumness pipeline. "I am happy to go visit. I'll be happy to make the trip," Hodgson then interjected. Following the interview, Coastal First Nation said they won't be seeking a meeting with the minister. So, I don't understand all this. I really don't understand the back and forth theatrics, the stalemate. I can respect why the Coastal First Nations doesn't want to have this pipeline directly on their lands. At the same time, though, it's not like you're negotiating with them. You're not making you're not reaching common ground. You're basically saying that, oh, because I don't want it in my backyard, it can never happen. And that just doesn't seem plausible. That doesn't seem plausible. And as I suggested, and I'm no, engineer, I'm no genius. This is just me spitballing. But if you're worried about a certain proportion of that BC land, again, there are other means to facilitate. You can build a pipeline around it. You can go maybe connect it north and go through the territories. Like I'm just spitballing different ideas on how to do this. But just it doesn't seem feasible. None of this seems feasible whatsoever. So here is David Eby appearing on Question Period by Vashi Capellos. And David Eby says BC Premier David Eby, who has been vehemently opposed Alberta's pursuit for a new pipeline to the West Coast, says he is open to a pipeline project in his province if the tanker ban remains in place. But that's kind of the point of the pipeline. That's kind of the point of the pipeline, because it's going to the tankers for export. That's why they're going in that direction. It's not just going to your province to heat your homes. It's going towards the tankers for export. That's kind of the point of this. That's the whole proposal. That's why Danielle Smith negotiated with Mark Carney and came to some sort of understanding on this. So here's the conversation that he had with Vashi Capellos on this. It's very...
Beyond, though, the optimization of TMX, I take your point on that. I take your point on the tanker ban. If there is the possibility of additional export capacity beyond that does not impact the tanker ban, are you inherently against that, is my question.
No, I think we can have those conversations. My anxiety is about this oil tanker ban, which is the foundational social license piece for tens of billions of dollars of investment in BC that is nearing final investment decision, and tens of billions of dollars of investment that is medium term as well, like expansion at the Port of Prince Rupert and so on. And so if we can agree that the oil tanker ban is going to stay in place, then let's have those conversations. I think that would make life a lot better and easier in British Columbia in terms of our relationship with coastal First Nations, and would definitely take down the temperature and maybe enable some creative solutions. I'd love to talk about refining. We're buying oil and gas from the United States right now. Let's refine some of that Alberta bitumen.
So he's even acknowledging to say that, I'm open to this because it doesn't make sense that we're buying U.S. oil. It doesn't make sense we're buying foreign resources when we have our own resources. So again, why are you particularly stymieing this proposal? Why are you being the gatekeeper that's not allowing for this? Because it seems like you are the one that's purposely stopping this. Alberta and Ottawa are agreeing to this. The coastal First Nations are willing to negotiate. There are creative solutions, as he said. I'm going to use his phrasing. To deal with this, to actually make it a possible outcome for everybody. So why are you not doing it? Why are you not implementing it? Well, he has anxieties. That's what he says. He has anxieties about this tanker ban that he put so much money in. So much money to stop the energy resource to go to BC ports so it can be made to export, so we can build up our economy. He's worried about actually building up the economy, it sounds like. Let's see the rest of this.
And use it in cars in British Columbia. Lots of people still driving gas cars, myself included. And why don't we do projects that add value to Canadian resources and get a net win for everybody out of that?
You sound, I hope you don't mind me saying, you sound less angry than you did the previous few times that we spoke about this prior to the MOU. Is there a reason for that?
Well, look, if the federal government is going to impose this on British Columbia, they're going to impose it on British Columbia. We've been down that road. I don't think it's beneficial to be fighting. The piece that does actually, if you're looking for Premier Eby agitated,
I'm not looking for it. I'm just curious. I promise.
Well, no, of course not. But the Nutrien decision gets me agitated because instead of Premier Scott Moe calling me up, engaging with me about this huge billion-dollar decision about whether to ship potash out of British Columbia or out of Washington State, he was engaging with Danielle Smith on this non-existent pipeline project. I didn't hear from the federal government about the Nutrien decision. I had no idea that there was even a prospect that this company would consider putting themselves in the hands of Donald Trump to have tariffs or ban of potash being shipped out of Washington State. And they made the decision, apparently, to ship out of Washington State instead of out of British Columbia. We should have been talking about their concerns about clogged up rail lines and access to the port. We should have been front of the line advocating with Saskatchewan, with the federal government for resources around rail to deal with that. But instead...
So why haven't you done that for how many years now? Like, I feel like we're listening to a confession. I feel like he's at a cathedral. Oh, I should, I repent my ways. I should have, talked to more premiers. I should have dealt with the trade more seriously. I should have, maybe gone down and talked to Donald Trump directly and actually had a proposal so the tariffs wouldn't be so bad. I should have done this. And as now, we're seeing the collapsing of a lot of industries happening in this country. Now, I don't know if that's the moment that he finally had this epiphany. I don't know what the case may be. But now it seems like he's actually, somewhat being on board with this. Saying that, well, I still drive a gas car. A lot of Canadians are going to drive gas-powered vehicles, that the EV mandates are, again, non-feasible. It's just out of the question. Just look at around, we now are into the winter months. It's going to be cold, it's dark, and frigid temperatures, a lot of snowfall that happened over the weekend. And, electric vehicle that could go through this, best of luck to you, but a lot of electric vehicles can't. And considering that China can manufacture vehicles at half the time and less money, they can make cars that fly under 10 grand, and we can't make just a regular car in that price. Is alarming. It's pretty alarming. So it seems like David Eby is finally slowly getting that epiphany. And again, I was on that side. I was on that side of saying, no pipelines, because I saw the oil spills. I saw what happened in certain places, and I get it. I get it. I don't want pollution. I don't want to, see a bunch of oil spills contaminating forest lands and whatnot. But the reality is, we're still going to be using fossil fuels. It's not going to go away. There's no way to transform every single aspect away from gasoline. That was just completely manufactured by the WEF. The whole net zero agenda is complete crap. And, this is ultimately a question of whether or not we as a country are going to sustain ourselves with our resources. Are we going to be able to maintain this country? Because if we kill off the energy sector and Alberta goes away, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. I mean, we're losing our auto sector in, places like Ontario and the Prairie provinces. I don't know what's happening with forestry. I don't know what's happening with minerals. I know that they're potentially starting up to do critical mineral extraction from certain mines or whatnot. But this is a big one. This is a big one. And this is why it's been a priority for a lot of different people. So here, this is from the Edmonton Journal saying Danielle Smith seeks to convince the UCP members on merits of Carney pipeline deal. So now she's going to reach out to her people at the Conservative Party of Alberta about how this negotiation is going to be beneficial for her party and for the province of Alberta. That's what they're saying here. Here's Mark Nixon saying that not only is Danielle Smith taking the time to, mention about the pipeline, but she's also going to take this leverage because now the ball is in her court that Carney is now accepting this pipeline proposal. So now Danielle Smith is up in the ante saying that we're going to stop this liberal gun buyback program. So remember the gun buyback? That they're going to go after hunters. They're going to go after sportsmen. They're going to take their rifles and supposedly have this buyback deal, which is an absolute failure. It has not really stood up to its commitment. And then that was also followed up by, hey, here's an idea. What if we take all those guns and send it off to Ukraine? Because, the neo-Nazis in East Europe need it more than we do. I know you want to go hunt and fish and you're a law-abiding citizen and went through the checkpoints to obtain a legal firearm, but we need to take it away from you. And you may get some money just to shut up about it and give it to a bunch of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's what Dominic LeBlanc said. That we need to donate it to Ukraine. It's a worthy cause. So here's Danielle Smith announcing part of the Sovereignty Act that she wants to up the ante with this stopping the liberal gun buyback program and also introducing castle law, which is self-defense for property owners. So if you own a house and someone breaks in, you're not going to be charged if you self-defend yourself, because that's what's happening in places like Ontario. So listen what she says here.
I'm announcing today that next week, our UCP government will be introducing a new motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act that will, if passed in the legislature, instruct all provincial entities, including our municipalities and law enforcement agencies, to refuse to enforce or prosecute under the federal gun seizure program.
Look at that, standing ovation.
Now, the Sovereignty Act motion will also make it clear that these agencies will not enforce or prosecute Albertans defending their homes and families from intruders.
Look at that, standing ovation.
I'm announcing.
So, this is actually pretty reasonable. He's not saying that Alberta's going to completely go off grid and not be part of Canada. He's saying that this proposal, this Alberta sovereignty in United Canada, means that we're still going to be part of Canada. We're still going to negotiate. But as a province, we're not going to buy to the standards that the federal government is trying to impose on us, meaning that we're not going to contribute to this gun buyback program. We are going to have implementation so that people can defend their homes if a home intruder breaks in. Unlike other provinces that are bowing the knee to the federal establishment that's brought to you by the World Economic Forum, that's really the ones masterminds behind all this. Because they want you to not have safety, not have happiness. It's a great reset. It's the own nothing and you'll be happy. That's part of this whole crisis. And it seems like Danielle Smith, despite some things I could say about her, she, is attacking ivermectin for some reason, going after doctors that are treating cancer patients with it. she definitely owns her craft. She definitely owns her craft when it comes to negotiating. And you got to give credit where credit's due, and I give credit to this. That she's willing to stick her neck out and say, look, we're not going to leave Canada. We're not going to take away the energy sector because we know how vital it is to the importance and, the maintaining of the country. And I think Alberta does not want to leave Canada and become completely separate, but we got to lay down some ground rules. We got to lay down a way that Alberta can still maintain its sovereignty as a province, but still be united with the rest of the country. And this seems to be a way forward. And it seems to be working in her favor because now you got the pipeline deal slowly passing. And we'll see about this. So let's see. We got some good hopes on that.